In the 2024 rookie running back class, no one had more total yards in the 2023 season than Kimani Vidal at over 1,800. He didn't play at the highest competition level, but he did have a very nice combine performance and is a player worth monitoring in this running back class. On today's segment from the Fantasy For Real podcast, I explore Vidal and where he should rank among the 2024 running backs. If you like the video, remember to hit the like button and let's get into it. So we are post-combine now, which means we have a ton of data and information objectively on these players. Kimani Vidal is 5'7", 7/8 inch, 213 pounds, 4.46 40 time, 83rd percentile vertical jump, 60th percentile broad jump. He also did 18 bench press reps, which is 38th percentile. I also usually don't bring that up, but in combination with the weight at 213 pounds, these two things are going to come up very shortly here to make a point with something else. So the big thing to point out right away with Kimani Vidal is that this is an ultra productive running back. He had over 1,600 yards the last year that he was in college. He also had a fairly active receiving profile with almost 100 receptions over his career. He didn't have any one individual season that you could really point to and say like, wow, that's a dominant receiving year, but he accumulated almost 100 receptions over the course of 4 years. The downside is that he did play in the Sun Belt, and the Sun Belt is what I mean, if we're getting really technical about it, I think the Sun Belt is what I would consider to be the 7th best conference in college football, behind the Power 5 and the American. I would put it above the Mountain West, I'd put it above the MAC, I'd put it above Conference USA. It's not the worst conference in college football, but it is the 7th. So just to put that onto estimations, there's obviously teams that are up and down everywhere, but if you were putting it in kind of a mean or an average perspective, this would be about between the 80th and 95th, say, teams in college football are the level of teams that are playing in this conference. So that's obviously a bit of an issue there in how to read the profile, specifically because being a workhorse is a big part of how you project Kimani Vidal moving forward. Kimani Vidal is a player who measures in at over 213 pounds, and so on that basis, you could look at him as an every down back. But I think that's when we're going to start to pivot and get into some of the more, the things that we try to do on this show, which is to get into both why players can succeed and also why they might not succeed as much. And Kimani Vidal is a player that, despite the workload, I do very clearly see him as a change of pace back. And what I'm getting into with this weight stuff is that this is a very subjective thing. And when I look at a lot of the objective things that I usually look into to determine some of these things, they really don't agree with me. He weighs in at 213 pounds, and the 38th percentile bench press suggests that he should have a decent amount of power. To my eye, he significantly lacks the ability to generate power, and I have a concern there. On top of that, objectively, according to PFF, he has a great number of missed forced tackles. But again, subjectively, to my own eye, I don't really see, again, the power as much. And I think that's where it's really getting into, I think, why this discrepancy is happening between what I'm seeing and what PFF numbers are, is that I talk about balance and burst a lot as my major two running back traits. But balance and burst don't really directly account for power and long speed. And power and long speed are both individually very important as well, and they're kind of related to balance and burst, but they're not specifically directly related to balance and burst. And I think, to me, they're the most important when you're either at the highest level or at the lowest level. And I'm a little concerned that when it comes to balance, Kimani Vidal is really there. But when it comes to power, despite the weight, despite the bench press, I don't see the power from Kimani Vidal. I've also mentioned this on previous shows, but I like to utilize Lance Zierlein's strengths and weaknesses sometimes when analyzing prospects. I don't necessarily like to use the overall grades for fantasy, but I do think that when I'm watching something and I'm not exactly sure if what I'm seeing is what I'm seeing, I like to see if the strengths and weaknesses page has corroborating information. And sometimes it even says something that I'm trying to put words into that I'm not quite doing a great job at and puts them in a better way, frankly. And Lance Zierlein, or I believe Lance Zierlein, in the weaknesses on NFL.com writes, fails to create much forward momentum when hitting the holes. And so that's, I think, what I'm trying to say ultimately with the Vidal thing. I do think he breaks tackles in general at times. I think he can keep his feet moving. I think he can stay upright. But he doesn't necessarily push people. He doesn't necessarily, like when he runs into tacklers, it seems like he gets stopped, like really stopped, like the momentum gets stopped. And so for that reason, that's kind of why I don't mean it as a dirty term, but when you look at him, Ray Davis and Blake Corum on paper, these guys don't really look that different. But to me, Blake Corum and Ray Davis, I would project these guys at almost different positions, really. Like, I mean, if I was really breaking it down on like an NFL team, I would probably be ranking running backs differently by what position or role I ultimately felt like they would run at the next level. And Ray Davis and Blake Corum would be closer to 3-down guys or early down guys, or elusive backs that could be early down guys. Whereas to me, Kimani Vidal is your change of pace back. I don't think Kimani Vidal is an interior rusher, and I'm just not sure that Kimani Vidal does some of the other things that those guys do quite as well either. That said, I do think when you're evaluating him as a change of pace back, there are a lot of good things, because being a change of pace back, that's not a dirty word. There's nothing super terrible about it. I mean, you're not going to get 300 touches, and that's ultimately what we want for anybody, but you can definitely still have value even if that projection ends up taking place. It's important to note first and foremost that one of the big things in terms of just projecting someone to be able to become a change of pace back at the NFL level is the ability to pass protect, and he actually has specifically high praise as a pass protector from his coaching staff as one of the best pass protecting running backs, maybe the best pass protecting running back they've ever worked with. And then I mentioned this up front, while he has no individually great season, almost 100 receptions over the course of 4 years is very solid. He has very quick feet. I've been watching a lot of wide receiver converted into running backs recently, and so I don't know if that's the reason, but you can really tell that he has some really nice quick feet, and you can see that also in his long speed, which is not elite, but is very solid, and you see that in the 4.45 or the around mid 4.4s 40 time that he ran. So he has good contact balance. I do think he can break those NFL tackles, but I also do think that the role for him might be just a little bit limited. And then one last quick negative. This one was also echoed, at least to an extent, in Zierlein in terms of the way he sets up tacklers. But when he gets a full head of steam downhill, he turns into a very, almost like a power, big, linear running back that doesn't really try to make people miss sometimes at the second level and just lowers his head and goes right into him, which, again, given what we just talked about with the power not being ideal for this player, that's not really a tendency that you want to see for this archetype of running back. You want to see a guy, as he progresses downfield at high speeds, is trying to set up tacklers in a way that creates different angles, that manipulates angles, and that gets beyond them. These are things that, at least in my opinion, guys like Devon Achane and Kenneth Walker showed to be extremely good at the college level. I don't think Kimani Vidal does this too much. I think sometimes Kimani Vidal just kind of sees a guy coming at him and decides to go at him, which is, it can work for certain types of running backs. I really don't think that's going to work for Kimani Vidal at the NFL level. So the bottom line here is, zooming out, there are 6 running backs in this class that I say like a good amount. And even those 6 I'm not super high on. But outside of that 6, it is a very wide open marketplace. There was nothing I saw about Kimani Vidal that convinced me that he was close to that 6. But outside of that 6, I think if you're looking at it, you might be looking at it by roles. And if you're looking at it by roles, next to maybe Bucky Irving and Dylan Laube, these guys might not project well for high volume roles, but these would be maybe my next 3 guys in a change of pace or in a pass catching back sense. So I'm not saying necessarily that my 7, 8, and 9 would be Bucky Irving, Kimani Vidal, and Dylan Laube, but I think these 3 change of pace type backs would be kind of my top 3 change of pace backs outside of the top 6. In kind of a similar notion, Kimani Vidal is a player that I wouldn't mind getting as an NFL fan to my team, as someone who could help peripherally as the change of pace back, who is a very good pass protecting running back. So a player, Kimani Vidal, who I got a little bit higher on watching him, looking over the data, but I didn't come away. I was hoping, like I always hope when I watch these players, I was hoping to come away thinking to myself, okay, this is a new guy that I can get really excited about, push into my top 5, my top 6, even say clearly things like maybe he's, the clear top 7 running back, despite situation and role. But that's not really what I came away with Kimani Vidal. I did come away with thinking, though, that this is a very, very solid player with a chance to carve out a role at the next level, specifically as a change of pace back. And so that's all I have for Troy running back Kimani Vidal. I have more NFL free agency reaction segments, as well as profiles on Xavier Legette, the wide receiver of South Carolina, and Tyrone Tracy, the running back from Purdue, coming later this week, so keep an eye out for those. Until then, see you next time.